Mother does not fidget. This is the first thing I learned about her. Before I understood her words, before I could follow the path of her eyes across a room, I understood this. Other women shift their weight when they are uncertain. They touch their hair. They look at their husbands. My mother becomes more still. She is still now. The Romans have arranged themselves at a long table like men who believe the arrangement matters. Their shoulders are square, their chins lifted, and the oldest one, the one who speaks while the others watch, has not looked at my mother directly since he sat down. He looks at Aldrich, our eldest warrior, who stands at her right hand. He looks at the young men along the walls. He looks at the fire, at his cup, at the grain of the wood beneath his palms, but he will not look at her. She notices. Of course she notices. But she says nothing. And the nothing she says fills that room like smoke. The Roman speaks through his translator, a thin man with frightened eyes who has clearly done this before and not always lived comfortably afterward. The words come out in two pieces, broken in the carrying. What reaches us is this. They have come to discuss terms of passage through our valley. They have gifts. They are prepared to be generous. And here the Roman smiles at Aldrich, a smile that crosses the table like a coin sliding across the table. Generous with the men who lead here. The room changes. Before I hear it, a shifting, a tightening, like the moment before a dog bites. Aldrich's jaw closes hard. The young men along the walls straighten. My cousin Bront, who is 17 and has never learned the wisdom of waiting, takes a half step forward and opens his mouth. My mother raises one hand, barely higher than her hip. Bront stops. Aldrich's breath comes back out slowly. The room grows quieter than it was before the Roman had spoke, quieter than seems possible with this many bodies in it, and my mother finally turns the full weight of her gaze onto the man across the table from her. He looks at her now. He has no choice. She speaks in our tongue, unhurried, and waits for the frightened translator to carry it across. When it arrives on the other side, I watch the Roman's expression move through several rooms quickly. Confusion, then a flushing of something hot, then careful blankness that I think is the closest these men come to humility. I am 12, and I do not catch every word, but I caught the shape of it. She has thanked him for his generosity. She has said that she will pass his good wishes along to the men he hoped to find here, to her father, resting these 3 years in the ground, and to her husband, these 2. She has told him that in this valley, in this village, at this table, he is speaking to the one he needs to speak to, and his gifts are welcome as long as they arrive without the assumptions wrapped around them. She says it in the way you say something that is not a threat, that has no need to be a threat, because it is simply the arrangement of the world. The Roman is quiet for a long time, but he then speaks. This time, the translator's voice is careful, picking through the words like a man crossing a frozen river, testing each step. Something about custom, something about the nature of things, something, and here even the translator begins to shrink about how where they are from. Matters of territory and negotiations belong to, and my mother smiles. I've seen her smile before. I've seen her smile at me, at harvest, at the well turned piece of work. This smile is a different instrument entirely.
You are not there.
No one translates. The Romans seem to understand anyway. The silence that follows is not the silence of offense. is the silence of a man recalculating, quietly, with his eyes down, the distance between where he thought he was and where he actually is. He reaches for his cup, he drinks. When he sets it down, he is looking at my mother, fully, in a way he was not before. Something has left his face. I do not have the word for what has replaced it, because I am only 12. My mother turns back to the fire, as though the matter is already settled, because it is, and says something quiet to Ulrich, who moves the table to begin the real business. I press myself harder against the wall behind me. My hands are cold, my heart is going fast, but I'm not afraid. I know this feeling. I have felt it standing on the ridge above the valley after a long climb, looking out at everything below. The smallness of it, the wholeness of it, the way it arranges itself into something that makes sudden sense, a feeling too large for the body holding it. I am proud. I am proud in the way I have never been of anything, including myself. And I think I understand for the first time the two things are not so separate. She came from somewhere. I came from her. The thread runs back and back and back. I look at my mother, at the straight line of her back, the gold at her throat catching the fire, the absolute quiet of her hands. And I make myself a promise. There, in the corner, where no one can see it. I will learn to be still like that. I will learn what she knows. I will not look away first. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Courtney, and welcome to the Time Travelers Club. Today, travelers, we will drift away from mythology and finally begin to explore the real-life women of the ancient Germanic world. The role of women in ancient Germanic society is a fascinating subject because, by the standards of the ancient world, particularly compared to their Roman contemporaries, Germanic women enjoyed a surprisingly high degree of respect, autonomy, and social influence. While they were not equal to men in the modern sense, they were considered vital partners in the survival of the tribe and were believed to possess a unique spiritual connection to the divine. To understand the Germanic woman, we must first understand her geography. The ancient Germanic universe was split. The Utadgarth was the chaotic outer world of the forest, the sea, and the battlefield, the domain of men. The Inagarth was the inner world of the fence, the field, and the fire. And this was the woman's empire. Let's start with a mental exercise. Forget everything you associate with the word housewife. The domesticity, the limitation, the smallness of it. Now try to imagine a world with no grocery stores, no hospitals, no banks, no schools, no pharmacies, no textile factories, no courts of law accessible to you directly, and no way to survive a harsh northern winter without the knowledge and labor concentrating inside a single building. Now imagine you are the person who runs that building. That is the Germanic woman. Her household, the Longhouse, was not simply a place to sleep. It was a factory, a hospital, a school, a brewery, a pharmacy, a warehouse, a temple, and a financial institution, all under one roof. Often, quite literally shared with the animals, whose body heat was a calculated feature of the architecture rather than a sign of poverty. The woman who presided over it was called a levdia, the direct ancestor of our modern word lady, which translates not as some honorary title of gentility, but as bread kneader or loaf giver. Her job, or her name, was her job description. And in a world where feeding people required mastery of fermentation, preservation, medicine, agriculture, animal husbandry, and resource management, that was no small thing. Germanic society divided the world conceptually into two realms, the Inagarth, the inner world of home, farm, and hearth, and the Utengarth, the wild outer world of forests, battles, and the unknown. Men moved between the two. The women ruled the Inagarth entirely. What often gets lost is that the Inagarth wasn't the lesser domain. It was where everything that kept people alive actually happened.
Yeah, and we were kind of talking about this last time with Seder, but this is where like we talked about like how the vulva and like the magic women, right? They're the only ones who can literally cross this line, the
Mm-hmm.
fencing of it all, like where they can go back and forth, you know. So here we're seeing this again with the fence um analogy. The hearth was the center of a woman's world, and you have to resist the urge to jump to conclusions before you can appreciate what it actually meant. Because, that felt like a loaded statement for me to say. That felt triggering.
No,
Yeah.
it does. It does.
It's
It
like,
has taken on a modern connotation of like all she's good for is cooking. And it's just like,
well,
hold on.
like the hearth was the center of the woman's world. Like that, I get my image in my head comes off as very Roman,
Very.
like a very Vesta, very, you know, of it all, Hestia of it all. But like that's not what we're meaning here. It's because we're gonna have to imagine this, right? Before central heating, before electricity, before gas stoves and matches, hearth fire was the only source of warmth in the building, in any building, but especially here, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
why the Vestal Virgins had to tend to that fire, right? Because it wasn't just like, oh shit, it went out. Hold on, guys, let me grab some matches. Like, nah, like now you have to get the where are you getting the fire from? You have to get like it's a whole thing, right? Um, especially in these cold environments, though, right? Where the only source of light after it was the only source of light after dark, where all the food was cooked, right?
Mm-hmm.
It went out. If it went out on a winter's night, you didn't just have a cold house; you had potential catastrophe. I mean, you had an actual catastrophe. Let's be real, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're probably dead. Like, um, mhm.
Mm,
So on the word,
literally.
I mean, like, sure, I'm sure it happened. Yeah, huddle close. That's why the farm animals were usually in the house with like Germanic peoples and the Scandinavians and stuff. Like they didn't have like a barn. Like they literally lived in the house with you because of this. It generates heat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like maybe not instant death. It depends on the night though, right? But it's not good. It's not good. On the worst nights, it was a death sentence for the very young, the very old, and the ill. The cultural weight around this was immense. Germanic people spoke of a household's fire going out as a disaster for the family's luck, which we kind of touched on a little bit last time. Their, I mean, yeah, the spiritual fortune that traveled with a bloodline. People sometimes compared this to the sacred fire of Vesta in Rome or Hestia in Greece, assuming it's a universal human projection of meaning onto ordinary thing. Maybe, but it's worth taking seriously the possibility that it didn't need projection, that the sacredness was a direct response to reality, because that is the reality of like the Mediterranean stuff too, right? In Egypt, anywhere you go, right, cold ass nights, like you need the fire.
Yes, the fire is how you
That's
live.
right. Since before when we were monkey brained, like like it's been important for a very very long time universally.
Correct.
Um, and so it's not like just careful, just careful being like, oh, this is an example of like, no, like that. See, like the Germans treated their women that no. But yes, this idea that fire in the hearth is sacred, of course it is, because it would be until like the late 19th century when we finally have like the invention of gas stoves and ovens and heating and stuff.
Yep.
So The cultural weight around this is, of course, immense, right? Germanic people spoke of a household's fire. Oh, we already did that shit, sorry. When something can kill your entire family if neglected, it probably deserves some reverence.
Agreed.
Her position near the hearth, her command center, if you will, wasn't just about cooking, like don't oh no, none of this, get back in the kitchen. No, no. Um, it was the literal and symbolic heart of the household's operation. From there, she supervised the children, directed servants, managed the thralls, which are enslaved people, unfortunately, mm-hmm. and orchestrated the daily rhythm of everything under that roof. And this is just like a normal household. Okay. When you start actually getting into like the bigger halls, she's doing a lot more than that, especially if the quote unquote man is away, if you will, right? She's leading, she's having to do everything he would have done if he wasn't there when he's out a Vikinging or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, she has to be able to step into that role and do well. And honestly, most of the time, she's the one doing that role, right?
Correct.
So, the master of the house had a ceremonial seat of honor, as you would, right? And the mistress had the place where the actual work of survival got done. And so, here's a question worth sitting with. What does a family eat in February in Northern Europe in the year 400 AD? There's not exactly grocery stores or winter imports. It's not like us here up in New York where we can just go to the local Wegmans and grab us some apples randomly in February when like, or whatever, right? The ground is frozen, solid, right? Whatever you're eating, someone had to figure out months ago that you'd need it, then process it and store it in a way where it would keep it edible, nutritious, and safe, right? And actually, this is just like a kind of little fun thing. Like we always think is, oh, the winter had to be the worst. No. Winter probably wasn't actually that bad. It was going like late, like spring into summer. Because nothing's grown yet. So you're surrounded by all the stuff that will feed you, but nothing's ready yet. So you have to make sure that crap lasts like right into May. Yep. The winter actually wouldn't have been so bad because like it really was only a couple months after that harvest. But by February, it's cold and things are starting to run out, and you can't just go out and grab something real quick. So that someone, though, who was doing all this, right, was the woman of the house. And food preservation here was a genuine science, refined over generations of trial, error, and observation. And it's all being passed down by oral, right? Like we've already talked about, they don't really have a written language at this point. And even then, like if you look at like Roman and Greek societies, it's not like there's cookbooks everywhere. Like that might be some novel thing that rich people who can read have, but like it's not. Most of the stuff is just all done by word of mouth and like watching. And fermentation was a cornerstone, as you would imagine, right? Which is actually kind of funny because when you think about Germany today, like, yeah, they're known for their pickled products. So, so women fermented vegetables, including what we'd recognize now as sauerkraut, because the process not only preserved the food, but increased its nutritional value and protected them against scurvy, because, that's something they have to consider too. It's not like they can go grab some OJ.
No.
They also
no oranges.
No oranges. I mean, there's apples and stuff, but like it's not like fresh, and like that's even then that's probably pretty rare, unless you're one of the upper classes. So another thing that they're fermenting is dairy into yogurt and cheese, extending the usefulness of milk by weeks or months. And they fermented grains into ale, which brings us perhaps to the most surprising fact about the daily life of the Germanic world. Well, I mean, maybe surprising for some. Ale was not a luxury. It was not considered a vice, and it was functionally the household's primary source of safe hydration, as it would be again until literally 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like the water can kill you,
Yeah.
you know.
I think there's a reason why a lot of people have trouble drinking just plain water, because
Hmm.
somewhere in our genetic memory, because our genes do have memory, that has been proven time and time and time again, it was not safe to drink it.
Correct. And there were very few places where it would be safe. And a lot of those places were considered holy because of it. It's like, okay, I went swimming in here and I didn't catch a brain-eating amoeba. This must be a nice spot must be sacred. Because I didn't die from going in.
Exactly.
And they don't know germ theory. They don't know that, honestly, if they just boiled the fucking water, it's probably fine. But, like, and again, we talked about the fire of it all, right? Like, are you really going to go through all that effort? It's not like it's stores, you know? Like, so it's not like they have plastic bottles, which, I mean, is good, but, you know? Um, so, like, with that being said, like, I mean, alcoholism was real then, just as now. I'm honestly going to say probably, I don't know. It's weird, right? You would think it would be more so of a problem when that's your only safe drink, right? And like, but yeah, I don't know. It seems interesting that like you would think that with modern stuff and so many non-alcoholic options, where you would think there'd be less alcoholics, but I don't know. It doesn't seem that way. You know, I'm sure
No,
there's a
and
study out there somewhere.
it's one of those things where it wasn't seen as a vice. There were people
Well,
that
right.
were too deep in their cups, and I think we've seen stories upon stories of people that, like,
Oh, of
no,
course. But
they
does it?
got lost.
My point was more that like you would think that alcoholism would be higher of a risk when like literally that's all you have, right?
Yeah.
That like there's more of a chance you become addicted to something because that's literally all you have. But yet, really, I feel like we see just as many stories as you would today. You know, like how any of these people are functioning every day. Honestly, don't know. It's that's to me the biggest history mystery. How the fuck did these world governments get their shit together when they're half in the bag all the time or hungover? It's just like, oh, but you know, good for them. And honestly, a lot of their alcohol content was way higher back then because there wasn't
Yes.
like they didn't have like a controlled way of doing things, you know. So I mean, good for them. Well, we know with the Greeks why, because they watered that shit down, which is interesting that they did that, you know, with this. But I'm sure the alcohol content cut whatever the hell was going to contaminate it. Which, speaking of, water near settlements was genuinely dangerous, as we're kind of saying here. It was contaminated with animal and human waste, um, which is where we get cholera from. um, so, and among many things, but that's the big one that jumps out to me. It's like cholera. Like, why are we dying? Because you're drinking poop water, guys. So, um,
Yuck.
and runoff. And it's not just that though. It's runoff from everything, right? Anytime
Yeah.
there's rain, it's going in. It's going in. Whether that's rotting carcasses, maybe your graveyard's too close. Like you know, there's a lot going on. Um, but fermentation, the process of it killed most of the pathogens that would otherwise make it deadly. Drinking ale instead of water was not therefore hedonistic. It was sensible. It was public health management centuries before anyone had a concept of germ theory. Men drank it, women drank it, the kids, they're drinking too. Everyone's drinking. Babies, all of them. No, I'm kidding. I don't know about the babies so much, but
Well, I mean, they did actually.
they did.
Like, well, okay, babies were breastfed for a very, very, very long time. Um, like you could find like an 8-year-old child that was still on mom's boob, realistically,
That's,
because
yeah.
that was a source of nutrition, and it could be controlled. Like,
Well, and also it's safe, right? Like it's
it's
safe. Like
safe.
safe. It's not water where it's contaminated, right?
Exactly.
Or like again, because milk from cows, milk from sheep, whatever. There's no pasteurization, guys. That comes
Exactly.
with the germ theory.
Yep.
Like So that's a risk too. Um,
Correct.
it's right, and like today, it's like, oh, weird. And then like I remember being a kid and you being really into ancient Egypt because I was a little nerd. Um, I remember seeing, the like, oh, it's the king being breastfed by insert goddess, right? Or like a little, like a kid, like my age, an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid sitting on a lap getting breastfed. I'm like, oh, they just don't know how to draw babies. That's all. No, like,
No.
and becoming an adult means, oh no, that's right. They probably were being, especially if you were king, being breastfed right till that age, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, on occasion or whatever, especially if it's like a time of lower nutrition, right? Like where you need to supplement some of that so that your kid can continue to develop health in a healthy manner, especially kings who would have access of on tap all the time because of all the wet nurses. So, I mean, it does
Correct.
make sense in its modern connotations where it's like, oh, you see the mom whip it out and her kid's like 6. And I won't lie, I'm one of those people where I get uncomfortable. And that's my own baggage, right? But
Well,
like
that's
it's because it's
also that's also because the formula companies literally went so fucking hard in the
Mhm,
1950s to demonize the idea of breastfeeding, and they still do in Africa, especially where women are not breastfeeding their children because of advertising. And I'm not saying that they are of lesser intelligence or anything like that. When you have information that is coming from what you perceive as a doctor, but all it is the attempt to get you to buy a product, but you don't necessarily have the information to make that kind of discernment, you're
mhm.
going to come to wrong conclusions.
Well,
It
and
happens.
the other part of it is too, like there was this. All right, so a tale as old as time. There were wet nurses, right? The idea
Yes.
of breastfeeding, that is for peasants, right? Rich
Hmm.
fucks don't do that. That's gross. That's why when people like Marie Antoinette and Queen Charlotte and all these other people are like, yeah, no, like Russo says we should probably be doing this shit. People go, mon dieu, you want to whip out CT? No. That's why we send your kid away till they're like 12 years old and you never see them for fucking 12 years because then they get breastfed by a complete stranger. Don't you want that? But also, she wants to live in her own house where people aren't fucking watching her eat every 20 minutes. And they're like, that's weird. But not me wanting to have my kid around. That's weird. But anyway, but like that being said, right? So this was in the culture for rich people, right? For the
Hmm.
aristocrats, right? And all the upper middle, like so, like your commoners that were rich, your
Hmm.
upper middle classes, that starts to bleed as like you lose the quote unquote aristocracy or don't have an aristocracy system like the United States, right? In the traditional sense. And you start to have this like middle class who want to emulate these rich people, right? They also hire wet nurses and things like that. And then it's like, well, not everyone can afford a wet nurse. So then by the time you get into the more like the 20th century and you have these formula companies like, oh, well, just use formula, right? And then it's like
Hmm.
you had a large middle class who could afford to do that. So they don't have to whip out the boob because, mon dieu, the tite, you know? And we sexualized tits.
Hmm.
They even in that era, that really wasn't why they didn't want kids to be breastfed. It so much as like it's complicated, and it's
Hmm.
not. It's like because breastfeeding is for the poors, and you don't want to become perceived as one of the poors. Eventually, the tit itself just became sexualized, right? Because a lot of these
Correct.
lower class women were sexualized, indecent.
Yep.
So there you go. We went on a whole side tangent about boobs and breastfeeding.
Yay,
Enjoy that.
titties!
Yay! So, that being said, water was bad most of the time. And we need to get through that. So, brewing this, though, who's doing it? It was the women. It was a female-dominated, high-status craft throughout the Germanic world and remained so well into the early modern period. Actually, a little fun fact. My grandmother's last name is Brewster, which it comes from this.
Nice.
So, fun facts. Because brewing was a female-dominated field, and therefore those people, somewhere along that ancestry, right, were women who brewed, enough so that they made it their entire surname, and the family decided, yes, that's what our family is known for, the women who brew things. So, there you go. Anyway, the person who controlled the household's safe water supply was women who understood fermentation well enough to produce something consistently drinkable. And it wouldn't kill you by drinking it, because you can fuck that up. Alcohol poisoning, you did. So they were the ones who managed the grain stores, needed to sustain production through the winter. That was the woman. A woman who brewed badly was a threat to her household's health, if not the community's, depending on how that's all laid out, right? And one who could brew well was economically indispensable, right? Like, that's why we see like this in like the Norse literature, right? Like these like beer hall women, right? And it's not just because they're like, oh, my name is Heidi and I carry the beer. Here you go, men objectify my body. No, it's like under the connotation of like, yes, I am hostess. This is my realm. I offer you brew that won't kill you because you're traveling and you need me. So, yeah. And then finally, we have meat preservation. Women managed the smoking of the meats in the rafters of Longhouse. Smoking of the meats. Anyway,
Euphemisms.
I'm a child. Anyway, a process requiring precise knowledge of which woods produced the right smoke for different cuts. Something that men. It's so funny because I know so many grill dudes, right, who take such pride in this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this was women's craft at one point.
Yes, it was. No,
Their ancestors would be frowning hard at them right now for being
this shit. A lot of this shit, all of this shit. Makeup was for men. High heels was for men. Like fucking. Oh, what else? There's so much.
Like
shit.
The color blue. Well, the color blue was for women.
The color pink was for men. And then like making beer, making like
it's pretty
smoked
much
meats.
At the end of the day, it's whatever the men at the time decide it's the thing they want to do. That's the masculine thing, and anything other than that is for women, right? So it's just funny because men decide to take an interesting grilling culture because it's like, oh, this is manly cooking because I'm dealing with fire and it's the nature, versus domesticity, which is in the kitchen, right? But again, originally cooking, like as a chef, that was a man's job. Interesting, because again, women usually ran the house, like the cooking staff. It goes back and forth, right? Mm-hmm. Just so know that. I just thought that was like a little funny. You've got women during this time period are the ones who are in charge of all that, and yet many men today consider that very masculine, an expression of how manly they are. So there you go. Just know that at some point, whatever your hobby is, was probably gender coded. It doesn't need to be. If you like smoke and meat, have at it. And yes, that's a euphemism. So with that being said, oak behaves differently, of course, from alder. Beechwood produces different qualities than juniper. In regions as densely forested as the Northern Europe, this knowledge was intimate and specific and accumulated, again, over lifetimes. The same deep familiarity with the properties of different plants and woods that made a woman a skilled meat preserver were almost certainly the same knowledge base that made women the primary practitioners of herbalism, medicine, and eventually magic. See there. Anyway, it's all coming together. And like the thing is, it's like, it's not just only special ladies got to do Seder, right? Everyone could practice in some way, right? Mm-hmm. Even men, right? It's like, just like anything, like how far are you willing to take it, right? Like when the NFL, they wear eyeliner and shit because, oh, well, that's different because they're trying to protect their eyes from the sun. Okay, cool. But if you put on lipstick, too far. So men in the forest, maybe you're on the hunt and shit, you scratch your arm. Well, I know this plant will help keep infection away. Stayed there, but you didn't take it too far, right? Because you're not out there getting bottomed. I don't know. The point is that it's nothing. No one's in a box here, right? And you may have someone who was most certainly could have been a vulva if they'd really wanted to, but for whatever reason, she chose the more quote unquote traditional pathway. Had all that knowledge, right? So there you go. And underlying all of this was resource management. The mistress of the house controlled distribution of everything. The grain stores, the ale, those preserved smoked meats, those sweet, sweet meats, dried herbs, seed stock for the spring, all of it, right? The woman, right? And then depending on like what area you're talking about too, how that's going to be doled out. Like think about that. Like if your husband's out a Viking, like whatever, and you're the one at home, someone's got to tell these slaves where to plant all the seed. She's the one dictating all that. She has to know agriculture. She has to know how that shit gets planted, where it goes, what time to harvest it. That's all her, right? And even if you're not in a big household, more than likely you are poor, and therefore they can't afford for you to sit inside either. So either way, you're out there and you need to know this shit. And it's up to her to figure that out and keep that mental math going. And this isn't a household where a bad calculation could mean actual starvation by March. Her ability to ration and plan was not a domestic skill. It was a survival skill, exercised every single day.
Absolutely. And now we're going to shift gears to a different aspect. Here is something that gets almost no attention in popular histories of the Germanic world. Possibly because it is less dramatic than shield maidens and blood feuds. Cloth was money. Not metaphorically. Literally. In a world without reliable coinage, high-quality textiles were a primary medium of exchange. You paid taxes in cloth, tributes in cloth. You bought cloth as dowry and traded it for cattle, iron, amber, and grain. All of that cloth came from the work of women. The process was staggering in its labor intensity. It began with removing wool from a sheep. Sometimes it was not even by shearing, but by ruing, pulling the fleece free by hand. So
that sounds horrible.
It's actually not. Think of it as more of when you are shedding, like you shed hair every day. So it's literally pulling the loose fleece out by hand. I've actually watched it done, and I want to learn how to do this because
it's more.
Yay.
I still stand by what I say in a different sense with my ADHD brain. Like, first of all, you have to pull all these loose pieces with the animal holding still. It's and like they're going to try to move, and like it's just like that's when you have a very limited amount of time in the day to get shit done. God, that sounds tedious as fuck. But good for them. Good for them. But yeah, yes, we have to remember today we have the benefit of like actual shear, like your own, buzzer clip shears. Like, but for that, it was just special scissors essentially, and they probably didn't even have, like you're saying, didn't even have that. So.
No, at this point in time, it wasn't. And it was just collecting the fleece. And realistically, in this kind of climate, because you have to figure we are very far north, even during like springtime, fall time, even in some of summertime, it can be fucking cold. Okay.
Well, even when
do you want to take all of the fur off of this animal that you are depending on for survival?
Well, even geographically, even if they're not that far north, right? Like, because like Scandinavia of it all, of course they are, but like even in ancient Germany, which goes almost as far south as like northern Italy, right? Yeah. Like that, but like it is very mountainous, right? And you have these, it's damp, if nothing else, right?
Exactly.
And yeah, it's, you're right. Like, no, in those high altitudes, especially, they need that protection too.
Exactly.
It's not like merry old England where like you kind of have like this sheep culture, but
no, it's
for
different.
sure.
So the raw wool itself had to be washed, carded, and spun into yarn with a drop spindle and a whirl. carried out every spare moment while also managing children and other tasks. The yarn then went into a vertical warp weighted loom for actual weaving. It is slow, skilled work that requires constant attention. And that was just for ordinary cloth. High status textiles, the kind that Germanic women produced well enough to be famous in Rome, involved finer grades of wool, careful dyeing, and complex weave patterns requiring both technical mastery and artistic judgment.
And
So
then
think of
there's,
it as
yeah.
like crocheting and knitting in a corner, but this is on a more massive scale, right?
Well, right, because you go buy the yarn, which is plastic, from a store. Like it's like every step of the process. Not to mention even the dyeing. It's not like, oh well, I just grabbed some dye. No, you had to go find the plants that do that,
You have to go
or
find the
bugs or
plants.
minerals or whatever it is.
Correct.
And then there's the thing that actually sets the dye, because you can't just throw some pigment on and call it a day. You usually have to have like lye or like salt, like peter or whatever,
Or
that
pea.
actually helps set it in. Um, Also, like, there's weaving, but there's also, we don't get into it all, but there's also felting too, which is
Yes.
also a process. But they were using that a lot for like waterproofing
Hmm.
clothes, right? Um, that's
Well,
where we end
because
up getting like,
wool is very waterproof. It is so
mm-hmm,
good for the more damp, cold climates because it's not going to be like letting that cold in, and it actually gets
right.
warmer when it's wet.
But like felting in particular was very useful for hat making, right?
Hmm.
That's why we get the Phrygian cap from, with that red cap that you see like the French people like on their little cartoons. That comes from a much, 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 much more ancient tradition,
Hmm.
all the way from Greece, Rome, specifically like these northern Germanic areas. So right, and the felting was popular because you could shape it to someone's head.
Yes.
Same thing with like gloves and socks and things like that, right? Um, because they don't have the tools yet to make something as sophisticated as like what we have today. But it's just crazy to think how much they would have to produce, and they
Yep.
are intimately aware of every aspect of this process.
Absolutely. In the later Germanic and Norse eras, this work scaled to something genuinely monumental. A single wool sail for a Viking ship required an estimated 1,000 or to 2,000 hours of labor. A group of women might spend years making one. Without that sail, the ship went nowhere. The romantic history of the Viking Age, the raids, the exploration, the settlement of Iceland and Greenland and North America, was physically underwritten by women sitting at looms for years at a time. The longships went where the women let them go. The spindle whorl turns up in virtually every free woman's grave, including those of apparent queens. It was buried with them as a defining marker of identity, the way a warrior was buried with his sword. Industry, skill at production, mastery of the loom, these were not lesser virtues. They were the virtues of womanhood.
And I will like to point this out, right? We are now learning more and more that it was not just women doing this work, right? Yes,
Hmm.
predominantly it was, but just like all men, all the burials with swords are turning out not to be men. There were people who were simply identified. Oh, this is a female burial. Look at that loom, and
And it
now we're
was a man.
double, and we're now second guessing a lot of it. Right? Is it as
Absolutely.
common? Probably not. You're probably not seeing kings or people of these upper echelons necessarily buried with these things, right? But like more common people, probably. Like again, you can't afford these gender norms when you're trying to survive, and
No,
maybe dad was one hell of a he made a sick hat. Like
absolutely.
rock on. Mom was maybe better at hunting. Sometimes you just took the role, that was you were a little better suited for, because do you really care about your pride in that moment?
No, we care about
So
survival. But not just
I
that. You
just
have to figure that these are villages too, right? They're not
mhm,
just like when we think of the woman in the longhouse and da 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 da. It is not just like single generational type things. The
mhm.
the nuclear family is a very, very, very new concept. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
just the lady of the house working on this. She also
Oh
probably
yeah,
has sisters and aunts and everything working on it too. Like it is a
yeah.
whole thing.
Cousins, little boys, whatever, right?
Exactly.
Like that's the other thing is like you don't think what do you think the little boys are doing? Just hanging out? No, they're of course helping with the chores and like that. And maybe mom is weeping, and she's like, "Here, hold this." And he absolutely had to stand there and watch his mom do that while all of his friends were playing outside. He's like, "Mom," and like that's not new, but that's universal.
That's very universal.
And it's like this idea that like everyone's in their own box and separate. That's not natural. Now, granted, as we see even today, right, the lower classes, you do tend to have a little bit more blending, right? You can gender bend a little bit, right, in like what you do. For example, like weaving, right? But maybe by the time you get to like a warrior caste or that and like gentry, nobility, right? Not acceptable anymore because why are you doing that? You don't have to,
Yep.
right? And that's where we start seeing just like women working out in the fields and like like same thing. Like, why are you doing that? You have
Exactly.
people for that. Why are you
Exactly.
breastfeeding your child? You have people for that. So like that's where we start seeing, and these are the things people that are being written about, not normal people, right? But
Mhm.
also doing like being a man doing those activities might maybe hinder you from ever becoming that warrior class, right? So it's a system that keeps you there. My point is that you
Yep.
might find some research out there that shows, oh, look at that. And it's not that these were, oh, yes, if you have a loom, you must be a lady. But typically, when it gets to the point of where you can split it, yes, it is usually associated with femininity and
Exactly.
womanhood. But that doesn't make it less.
No,
So,
definitely not. So men handled the heavy plowing, right? But the agricultural work didn't stop there. And most of what remained was, in fact, women's work. Kitchen gardens were women's domain. Carefully managed micro ecosystems producing food, medicine, and raw materials simultaneously. Yarrow to stop the bleeding, valerian for sleep, elderberries for respiratory illness, plantain for drawing out infection, flax for linen, lighter and less abrasive than wool, and preferred for garments worn against the skin, so your underthings.
also, just for the record, when we say plantain, we don't mean like plantain, like the banana. It's a type of grass.
It is. It is
So,
a type of grass.
like a wild plant. Yes.
But managing a productive kitchen garden required understanding soil, drainage, seasonal timing, and companion planting. It was a horticultural science practiced empirically. Dairying was almost exclusively female because how dare you touch cow titty? Every morning and
Again,
evening,
little boy probably help. Like, younger
well,
kids.
probably.
And that's the other thing too is gender, like really again, and this is historically, right? Like until you become of a certain age, nothing's really gendered, right? Little like FDR was wearing a dress, dude, when he was a kid. Like, right, because it
That's
was
normal.
practical. And same thing, little boys and little girls, because mom was watching them, are of course going to help with these household chores and shit. It's once they get to a certain point, they have to start conforming to their genders. But
Yes.
you know,
But every morning and evening, cows and goats had to be milked, a process requiring patience and an established relationship with the animals. Try milking a stressed cow that doesn't know you. You are going to get a hoof in the middle of your forehead. The milk then had to be processed quickly into yogurt or churned into butter, or, the most valuable transformation, pressed into cheese that could be stored, traded, and transported. Dairy products were the household's primary protein source and a major trade commodity. And I have watched so much on the art of cheese making, like in the
mm-hmm.
home, like around the time period that we're going on, and oh my gosh, they literally had like little, I'm not going to call them huts
Oh,
because they were attached to the
yeah.
houses, but that was specifically for cheese making. And
Well, and you have to think.
everything that they made off of cheese making, because they could sell it too, that was entirely the woman's.
Well, and the thing is too, it's like why sell if everyone can make it? Because not everyone could make it, right? You might have someone who just had better land for that, and hence the cave cheeses, right? Maybe
Exactly.
your property has a good spot just naturally for that shit, right? So, like, of course, yes, it's something everyone needs and wants, but not necessarily everybody has the ability to make it, at least in large quantities, right? Or
Exactly.
especially if you're like, shit, I ran out. You know that your neighbor Helga makes the shit, right? And that's the other kind of economy that's happening here. But this sounds like a Patreon episode that we need to do because we've already done winemaking. Let's do cheese making, wine and cheese.
I
You
love
know,
cheese. Cheese just doesn't love me
me.
back. It's fine. So, women were also the household's medical practitioners. The Germanic word for healer was leech, a role frequently filled by women who maintained what amounted to working a pharmacopoeia, which bark, which bark reduced fever, which leaves numbed pain, which roots could slow bleeding. This wasn't superstition dressed as medicine. Much of it was accurate applied pharmacologies built up through generations of careful observations. Also, willow bark is the one that reduces fever and can take away pain.
Well, they're
But
saying like which bark does what, which, and you have to be
yes,
careful with willow bark
yes,
because
you
willow
do.
bark can also be poison. And people, I remember being a kid and it was like, oh yeah, like the indigenous people and early colonists were just chewing on willow bark whenever they had a headache, and it's like, no,
Mm-mm.
that's bad. Don't be saying all that. But that's what I
No,
was taught
you
as a
have to
kid. I'm
make
like,
it.
well,
You
how
have to
come
make a
they never
tincture
did
out of
this
it.
before? And I remember thinking, like, how come they weren't just doing this before? Like, it seems like if it's that common and easy, it seems really stupid that the white people only figured that out in like the 1600s. And it's because it's not true. That's not how it worked. And
No.
yes, we had that. The white people had that in Europe too, but it had to be
Hmm.
processed.
Yeah, well, everything really needs to be processed in a specific way. It's just like any kind of medicine, right? Any kind of modern medicine, regardless of what you're using. If you take too much, it becomes poison. It's dosages. It's really dosages. But the same extended to veterinary knowledge, because livestock were the family's primary financial assets. A woman who could recognize illnesses in animals, assist a difficult birth, and address common conditions was directly protecting the household's economic stability. Modern historians tend to quantify women's contributions through tangible outputs: the cloth, the cheese, the ale. But the economic value of keeping the cattle alive is harder to measure and usually gets overlooked. But it was substantial. Cows look for
Yeah.
ways to hurt themselves. They are
Hmm.
dumb. They are huge dumb pasture puppies.
Well, and it depends on like where you are too, right? Like, because like in Scandinavia, like you didn't have herds of cow, right? You just didn't, because where are they going to graze? You might have a cow, right? You didn't have like here in America where we have like whole ranch. Like, no, that's also very modern, but no. You have to have the like right environment for that. Hence why certain cow breeds come from like central Germany or England, like Jersey cows, and hold back cow, whatever the hell they're called, cows. Whatever. The point is that, yeah, like you're saying, cows are not necessarily easy to keep alive. They also just eat stupid shit.
Yes, they do.
Like,
And they like to stick their heads in things. Why
yeah,
do all cows like to get their heads stuck in shit? For
and
what?
like, and the thing is like we know this because like there are so many plants that are like cowbane, like I remember when I was a wee nerd, in like high school at this point, I was all really into like plants as well. That was the thing I was also into. Also poison plants, not for weird reasons, just happened to be something I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like this beautiful plant could kill you. But like the amount of plants I learned, I'm like, wow, these are poisonous. But also the reason we know they're poisonous is because cows would eat them. And you're like,
Yep.
oh, these are dangerous to cows. I'm like, why is this like a reoccurring theme? Like sheep do it too, to a degree, but cows in particular, man, and they'll keep going for the bad thing. It's just really weird. They could literally have all the healthy stuff around, and they'll go for the bad thing. Anyway, the point is that cows, like just like we were talking about cloth being like in part of Germanic society, like a big trading tool. You see in Ireland and like like those ancient Celtic countries, cows were that for them. You traded in cow.
Yep.
Um, so I just find that, it's These are the things that are hard to make or hard to come by and keep alive. So to lose your cow is disastrous, especially like if it was like in the middle of winter. You're fucked, like not good. Um, yeah, because like at the best of times, it's like crap. Now we have to go buy a new cow, and there's not just spare cows around. It's not like I go to the dealership and get me a cow. It's shit. My car shit the bed, or shit, my cow shit the bed. I guess I gotta go get a new cow now. Is there a used model? No. And people who have cows are typically I need my cows. What are you going to offer me that's more valuable than a fucking cow?
Exactly.
So, it's better to keep them alive as long as possible. So these poor women, you have to think about how much they're juggling, right? And when we are saying house too, right? We're mentioning all these things like they seem like they'd be pretty far from a house, right? Because if you're thinking of like a village where everyone's right on top of each other, no, like it's like people are spread out pretty far. You have a lot, like not too far where you can't go get help or something, but like if you're in like rural America or Canada or something like that, now you probably have a better idea of this, right? Like where your next neighbor is way the hell down the road, right? Same concept. So like you would have woods on your property, you would have this, and you would probably have a fence to mark all that off, right? So it's just these women, goddamn, they're not housewives, they're not.
No.
When we say they are housewives, we mean the whole house, several acres of it. Like they got plenty to keep them busy. So now we're gonna pivot away from like all this, and we're gonna talk about what does education look like, right? Because you might think, why are you talking about there's no education, right? So as we mentioned before, the Germanic tribes were largely non-literate until the late migration period. This is going to be like 4th, 5th, 6th century CE, right? 500 so years after last season. So everything the culture knew lived in human memory and had to be passed down from person to person through speech and demonstration. So oral, right? The primary transmitters of that knowledge were women, which I think is interesting, right? Because when you think of like stereotypes, I guess, right? It's usually the chief or the man who's telling the stories, or there's like the guy who, like the witch doctor who's telling the stories and the keeper of the lore. But it's actually women
It's
in many,
typically
many, many
grandmothers.
cultures.
This is it's typically the grandmas. Here's the thing.
Or
How many species have the concept of menopause?
Right. And again, like men did this too. We have bards. We have that.
Yes,
of course,
we do.
men did it. But even then, bards have always been kind of viewed a little side eye as they're a little feminine, aren't they? Right. Because these are roles that blur and they don't necessarily go with one or the other. So they're like, there's always an othering with them in a lot of cultures. But
yes,
not always in a bad way. Like not in a way like clearly they need them. But like it's like, oh yeah, that's Uncle Frank. And Uncle Frank, yeah, he never got married. He had a lot of roommates. Anyway, but he's really good at telling the story though. Great actor. Anyway, but with that being said, like also the vulva, of course they're gonna know all the stories, bruh. Like that's literally like one their main part of their job. So like why are we surprised that women are transmitters of this knowledge? Every child, and that's the other part too, if they're home all the time, right? They're the masters of the hearth and home. That's where the kids are. So they're the number one person interacting with these kids. So every child need to learn a staggering amount before they were old enough to function independently, right? This, I think we have as a society, this is like this idea of tutors and stuff like that. That was a very Greco-Roman of it all, right? B, that was only for rich folk. So, especially in these kind of small communities that we talk about, why would you have a tutor? Like your tutor is that guy, and they're gonna teach everybody. And also your mom's gonna teach you stuff because she's there with you all day. It makes sense. So they needed to learn a staggering amount, though, independently. Um, so they have to learn the genealogy of their family. That is a huge deal because a lot of laws and stuff are written around this. We kind of touched on that with the Otar story with Freya, right? It's important. It's very important to them. Who they were allied with, who they had feuded with in the past, what obligations their lineage carried, who owes debts to who. In the world governed by something called the Verguild system, um, not knowing your genealogy wasn't an embarrassment. It was actually a legal liability. Like they're like, okay, who are you? Why do you think you say you had a neighbor who's grazing on your land? You're like, no, this is my land, right? Well, who gave that? Who gave you that land? If you don't know, what are you doing, bro? Like it's their word against yours at that point, right?
Exactly.
So a child who didn't know their ally, and then who are you allied with? That's a good thing to know before you accidentally kill someone because they're walking through your woods. That would be bad. Or that's another thing. Like, say your neighbor had right to use those woods because they had an agreement with your great grandfather, and you just see this rando because you don't see everyone every day because they're all living far apart, and you kill them. Did you murder someone or were they trespassing? If their family's like, nah, we have an agreement, and they call your cousin Billy, and you're like, oh yeah, your mom taught us all that. What are you fucking doing? Well, now you're an asshole who just killed somebody, and that's a whole thing that I'm not getting into because it's not like you go to jail. Anyway, so you need to know all this. And mom's got to teach you, right? So they also need to know the land, right? Which plants are safe or medicinal or poisonous, right? You don't need to accidentally eat too much foxglove. That'll kill you. No foxglove tea for you. Which routes were reliable? Where the fishing ran well in certain seasons. So you're not wasting your resources and time fishing in a spot that's never going to catch anything. They need to know codes of honor. What constituted as an insult that demanded a response? Like, did someone call you an arrogant? Well, beat their ass, I guess. How disputes were properly escalated before they became blood feuds. And they needed the stories, the myths, the ancestral tales that gave the community its shared identity and its framework in the world. All of that was women's work. Men told the great sagas at feasts, right? So they have to remember the big fun stories. They get to recite it's like the equivalent of a dad who just tells you like the entire plot for like a Marvel movie, right? Mm-hmm. Your mom's teaching you, okay, look, bud, sit down. We gotta figure out this law stuff. Also, don't eat that, you idiot. You'll die. Like, the shit that honestly matters, right? Dad's telling you the fun stories. Mom's telling you the ones that'll keep you alive. So, by the everyday transmission of practical, structural, and cosmological knowledge happened in the longhouse between mothers and the children and grandmothers during the long hours of textile work, in food preparation, and fire tending. Because again, little Timmy's, I don't know, Timmy's not good work. We're going to call him Olaf. Little Olaf is holding that goddamn yarn, and his mom's bored too, so she's going to talk to him. So she's probably like, kill two birds, one stone. Hey, little Olaf, let me tell you a little tale about how your Aunt Cindy fucking ate these plants. I don't have an Aunt Cindy. You did.
Yeah, you.
Let me tell you why. Yeah, let me tell you why you've never met her. I can totally see that happening. I really can. So
that would be you as a parent. I swear to God, that would be you as a parent.
I'm nice. I'm not that mean. But my grandmother was definitely that person. So maybe. Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's good I don't have kids. Anyway, I would either be a fantastic parent or like traumatize them. I don't know. Maybe a little both. Just a touch of trauma. Yeah, a little trauma just to make them interesting.
I mean, you got to get them some sense of humor somehow. It's okay.
Right. Dark humor. Anyway, so that being said, now we're going to pivot again This time to marriage, sex, and not gender, but sex. And sex with 3 X's. And the structures of daily life, right? Anyway. Do me with your Phrygian cat, buddy. Anyway, so, show me those felts. Oh my god. I just had the weirdest image of like, it's like what's their equivalent of a guy doing you with the socks on? It's real cringy, but it's like the felt socks and that hat. Like, just that. Anyway.
Oh, why?
The smells. Anyway. I swear I would survive in the ancient world. I'm just like, god damn it. I'd get out and like, get me back in there. Oh no. I'm not built for this. So, Roman writers who encountered the Germanic people were often struck by how different their domestic customs were, because they were treating their women well enough.
So weird.
So weird. What? You talk to them? Anyway, did you just ask for her opinion? Why the fuck does that matter? Anyway, so you trust her with cooking your food? But she knows all the poison plants. She hasn't tried to kill you.
Oh.
Are you telling me if I treat the women in my life with respect, they won't try to poison me to death? That's crazy. Anyway. She must bewitch you. So Tacitus, you've been bewitched. Anyway, it's proof. So Tacitus noted with something approaching approval, oh God, that Germanic marriage differed from Roman practice in the ways it seemed to him more morally serious. Here we go. Romans and their morality. One of the most striking differences was the direction of marriage transaction. Where Roman custom transferred wealth from the bride's family to the groom, Germanic custom ran the other way around. Whoa! Because Romans are like, you want me to take your girl? Well, what are you going to pay me for this? She's a girl. Ew. What the fuck am I going to do with her? I guess I'll fuck her. But, like, you need to pay me for that. Anyway. Meanwhile, the Germanic custom had it where the groom paid a bride wealth to the bride's family and then gave Morgengabe directly to the bride the morning after their wedding. So I don't love it, okay? Because at first, if you read it, you go, ew, so he pays for his wife? Like he bought her? Don't look at it that way.
Yes and no, yes and no, yes and no.
It's very complicated. We're going to get into it, okay? Just hang in there, okay? I'm not saying that trafficking didn't exist, but that's not what this is, okay? It's a better system, right? So the gifts, as Tacitus notes, ran to the practical. So oxen, saddles, weapons. While the transaction was between families, the bride's wishes were at least formally taken into consideration, and her birth family had real incentive to ensure she was marrying into a good situation, and her welfare reflected on them. So, like, again, they have the bride has say in this, right? And it's also bonding the families, right? It's like, hey, I really like this girl, right? And I'll do anything to get her. And then they'll go like, do you want to go with him? And she'll be like, I mean, I don't date no scrub. A scrubbing. So, so she's not looking for a guy, banging on the passenger side, trying to holler at her. So, what you going to offer, boo? And he's like, look, I have a job. Look at all these cows. And they're like, oh, we've been eating a couple cows. All right. And it's like, cool. Together we will be better as a family. In return, I, as a wife, am going to help you manage all this bullshit because Lord knows you won't be able to, and also I make one hell of an ale, so it is transactional. Okay. Don't get it twisted. In this time period, it has to be. But, like, it's not like she's on a market and someone's, like, grabbing her by her jowl and checking her teeth. Like, no, that's very Roman and Greek, but no. Um, there's a benefit to both of us. Like, both of our families can flourish, and we're about to be bonded and become one family, right? So we need to be able to do that for each other, right? So that's what we're looking at. On age, Tacitus notes that Germanic women married later than their Roman counterparts. The Visigothic law, which does come much later, right, but gives us an idea, placed 20 as the prime of life for both sexes, implying parties should be approaching actual, legal, biological adulthood. This contrasted the Roman practice where girls are married off at 12.
Ew.
Right. So, like, not that every Roman girl was married at 12 or anything like that. No. But, like, especially in the wealthier families, they were. But it's like, yep, bend over, 12-year-old little girl. Ew. But, like, here it's like, no, 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 no. What the fuck are you doing? Get
That's
some
a
meat on
baby.
that
Go
girl's
away.
bones. Yeah, get some meat on this girl's bones. Like, God, let her hit, like, beyond puberty. At least allow her brain to develop a frontal lobe. Jesus. Like, she doesn't even have the right hip structure for it yet. Like 20, you'll be fine. And lo and behold, birth rates probably were better and didn't kill both parents. Or, well, both mother and child. Anyway, so monogamy was also an official norm. Whoa. Which again, not necessarily saying monogamy is the way to go. I'm just saying, we'll get into it. Adultery for women was severely punished, okay? Not cool. Though we'll get into it. The described penalty is vivid. The husband cut off her hair, strips her, and marches her naked through the village. Loss of hair was the mark of the unfree, and the public nature of punishment was the point. She was being ritually unmade as free, honorable women. For men in positions of power, however, the norm bent. Kings and chieftains sometimes maintained multiple partners for political reasons, and law codes governing ordinary people did not always apply equally to the top. So, I mean, in this sense, it is very similar to Rome. But in Rome, like, you could just kill her. Just kill her. Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
So, and there is, if you watch the show Vikings, you will come under this thought that they had these, like, lives where they could just, like, have thruples and, like, not even thruples so much as, like, as long, like, that they could have playthings, right? I'm not saying it didn't happen. It's just not that's not the reality that we're getting, right? And we talked about Eric and stuff too. Like, there's already so much gunk around, like, how to even perform the act. It seems not likely, and that seems like for views, Marriage also brought a woman under her husband's guardianship, in the most formal sense made her his property. Okay? We're going to sit with that. But the practical reality was more complicated, okay? Her birth family retained the legal right to intervene if her husband mistreated her badly enough, right? So, like, that's good.
I hate that badly enough has to be stated, but
yeah. But to be fair, it would not serve his interest to hurt her with what we just talked about, how much she's already fucking doing, like, so complicated. It was terrible for everybody, no matter where he went. We've made it out like, oh, like, we're not romanticizing this, right? Women were not like domestic housewife 1950s housewives. However, this is not, like I said, a patriarchal society. It is not separate but equal spheres, because that's never been a thing, right? So then there's the Morgan Gob, ensured that she always had resources that were legally hers. That is unique, right? That is something the Romans did not do, and especially the Athenian Greeks, right? The Icelandic sagas are particularly vivid on what happened when marriages went wrong. Feuds that burned through generations often had women at their origin. A wife who goaded her husband to avenge an insult. A widow who refused to let a killing go unanswered. And these aren't stories about passive victims. They're stories about people with real grievances, real agency, operating within a system that constrained them formally, but couldn't contain them entirely, right? You did have relationships where people were fiercely loyal to each other and loved each other, right? And you also see stories where a man was a dick and he did beat the shit out of his wife, and the family were like, absolutely the fuck not. And that caused
That caused a blood feud.
years. Correct. Like, that's not something you heard too often at Rome.
No.
In the worst, yeah. So, in the worst historical circumstances, catastrophic military defeats, the evidence is stark. Roman historians recorded that after the defeat of the Cimbri and Teutons, the women of those tribes killed their children and took their own lives rather than face Roman captivity. Okay. I'm going to put a little asterisk.
Oh.
We're going to put an asterisk here.
Yeah.
It could be true.
Mm-hmm.
It could be. It could also be demonization.
I'm gonna say something as a mother, knowing what the Romans did to their slaves, knowing how that they were dehumanized, knowing
and we're
how
not
the
even...
children were treated,
like,
and yeah,
it could be control, but also the Romans were real keen on suicides, as we've talked before, unfortunately. So on the one hand, it's very Roman, but on the other hand, it's also like, oh, how monstrous that a woman could do that to their child, right? So
it's
not
monstrous at that point. I'm gonna argue for the fact that it's not.
Like I said, I could just see both. I could just see both sides, and the fact that we just don't have the German at all, let alone German women saying, "Yeah, no, that's something we've done. Here's example."
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. I always say, take it with a grain of salt. But I agree with you. That's my other side of it as well. Is like, but they were the Romans, and it could be a pride thing too. Like we would, like that maybe a cultural thing where it's like with these particular tribes, like no, if our men die, we die with them. Like we don't know. We just don't know.
Well, this is something that we've kind of discussed, because the world over, this is a thing where the men get catastrophically defeated and the women are like, we're out, you're not taking us, we're gone. No. Like in India, where the women literally all of them threw themselves into the fire.
Well, even that was that's a whole separate like podcast episode, to be honest, because I love that you brought that up, because in a lot of traditions it's suspected that wasn't even consensual at first. That was just like what you did. And then eventually it became normalized to the point where that's like, oh, no, that's what I'm doing. And then it's like, now it's like, no, don't do that. Which, I mean, I get it. I agree. I mean, through a sort of colonial lens, I just don't think that's okay. But anyway, I don't want to have too much of an opinion on some of that. But
fair.
That being said, whether we read these acts as desperation, cultural coercion, or some defiant assertion of agency when all that agency was about to be gone, maybe all three, it does suggest that for Germanic women, the stakes of warfare were experienced at just as absolute as they were for men. So the last section we're going to kind of touch upon, we kind of did it we definitely did it last episode, but that was more with like Theoreses and Satyr in particular. But like I said earlier, they were not the only women performing magic, right? And they were definitely not the only ones a part of ritual or religion, right? So let's talk about that for a minute. Large communal sacrifices, like the seasonal blot, had their male officiants. But the day-to-day religious life of the community happened at a household level, and that was women's territory. Women led household offerings to the Landvatir, or land spirits, whose goodwill kept the farm productive and family protected. They poured libations, like ale, a splash of milk, onto the threshold or the hearth, maintaining the relationship between the living household and the invisible forces surrounding it. These daily small offerings constituted the actual texture of religious life for most of the people most of the time. And again, we go into this right with the Seder and all that, but that's because women were kind of coded as being just more in tune with that sort of thing. So naturally. And then childbirth was also exclusively female ritual space, right? Men were excluded entirely. It was understood as a liminal moment, a threshold, if you will, between worlds, where the boundary between the living and the dead was usually thin. Women attended, performing ritual protections, and managed both the physical and spiritual dimensions simultaneously. Presiding over this threshold, where new life entered the world, and death was, let's be real, always a real possibility, reinforced a broader cultural sense that women had particular access to the other world. They were liminal beings themselves. And again, we talked about that too with they know the herbs. They know the healing because they're doing it every day. So it makes sense, right? That even if they don't understand why, they probably understand keeping your hands clean. Hot towels, things like that seem to help, right? It's when we get into the early, the Enlightenment and in late medieval, and man, doctors are just shoving dirty fingers after they just put those dirty fingers in a corpse up your hoo-ha, and oh no, she died.
No, and there is a direct correlation between the demonization of the midwife and the almost want to call it the othering, the over spiritualizing the midwife, and the takeover of the male doctors. Yeah, no.
And there's also that too, because it's anything the midwives do, don't do it because we are men. So it's they're going out of their way a lot of times. The midwives are no, for real, maybe use these plants, they help. Use this water with these plants in it and boil it, it helps. And it's they don't know it, but it's because it's sterilizing shit. But the guy doctors are oh, hogwash, you silly women folk with your superstitions. Takes out dirtiest hand you can possibly imagine with dirt under the nails and blood. This'll be fine.
Yep.
I'll just reach up in there. Anyway.
Yep. And then having the women in the worst possible position, which is on your back with your legs up, if you didn't know. Yeah, let gravity do the work. I've had 3 children. Had to have them cut out of me because of modern medicine.
Also, just... And it's not that modern medicine doesn't have a place. It does. Do not get me wrong.
Yeah.
My point is just... And for whatever reason, human beings are not built very well for making kids. Oh,
no.
If you compare us to other animals, it's crazy. Chimps, they just reach up in there and pull it out of themselves. That's wild. Anyway, my point is just that, there were practices that they didn't know why they worked, but they did. And it was these guys were just going out of their way, all for their fragile egos. And at best, when it didn't go well, they go, oh, it must have been God's choice. And then at worst, it's that lady suggests I do that. She must have done witchcraft. Anyway.
Exactly.
So there you go. So, or there's also that mother just must not have tried hard enough. That's why she died.
Oh,
anyway.
My God. The fact that the chainsaw was actually invented for C-sections. Keep that in mind. Yeah. Congratulations. You now have mental images that I haven't been able to remove from my head.
To be fair, I feel like I knew this fact, and you may have actually also reintroduced that fact to me a while back, but thank God my ADHD brain usually likes to like put that in the archive where I can't reach it on a daily basis. And now you've brought it back. Thank you.
What can I
So
say except you're welcome?
so this perception crystallized in that figure we talked about last week, the vulva. These were the seeress who practiced Seder, the magic associated with fate weaving, divination, and the manipulation of word. The concept of destiny that ran, or weird? Weird.
Weird.
Weird. It's where we get weird from.
Uh-huh.
The manipulation of weird. The concept of destiny that ran through Germanic cosmos. And the vulva was not a village eccentric, as we talked last time, or a witch shunned by her society like they would be depicted later. She was a specialist of the highest order, and she would be consulted by kings, feared by enemies, treated as a conduit to knowledge ordinary humans had no access to. She traveled between communities, which makes her weird, you know, because we just and she also entered these trance states with chanting and drumming, journey to the spirit world to gather information, named lucky and unlucky days, predicted battles, and advised on everything from marriages to wars. The cultural logic connecting women to the spirit world was an arbitrary mystification. It grew organically from these roles that women we've been discussing already played by presiding over birth and death, transmitting ancestral knowledge, maintaining the household rights, and keeping that spiritual ecosystem in balance.
So let's talk legalities. The legal framework governing Germanic women is one of those areas where you have to resist both the temptation to retroactively modernize it and the opposite temptation to simply write it off as primitive oppression. The reality was considerably more nuanced, and in several respects more protective of women's interests than the contemporaneous Roman law. The fundamental concept was mundium, guardianship. A free woman was not a legal island. She was always under the formal protection of a male guardian, her father or brother before marriage, her husband after. Widowhood, for many Germanic women, was the moment of greatest formal freedom. She might pass under the protection of an adult son, or in some tribal codes, hold her own mund, and become effectively the legal head of the household.
And I will say something about this, right? Because, like, okay, this part, not honestly that different than Roman women, right? Except they're at least trained to run that household, right? And let's be honest, widowhood, way more likely, right? This was honestly probably a much more common experience for women. And this, woman, like widowhood, if you were like a poor in Rome or middle class, not good. You need to get hitched immediately. Honestly, for most aristocratic women too, because you can't own shit.
Correct.
Right? You better hope that your son is easily manipulated, right? So, like, that's the caveat here. Though there were
or
some
he's
exceptions,
a mama's boy. Hope he's
like
a mama's
Livy.
boy.
Like Livia, would love to cover her one day. She did actually own. She was a bajillionaire, but like, typically, right? That's not the norm.
Yeah.
And they're definitely like, yes, Roman women could be trained to run a household, quote unquote, but like Livia's not weaving, despite what her propaganda would tell you. She had people for that. She's not cooking. And then like on the flip side, like the peasant girl, like she's not really doing that either, especially if they're urban. Like, and a lot of Roman women in particular were, because there were the latifundia doing the farming at that point, industrialized farming that used thousands and thousands of enslaved people.
Correct.
Like you didn't have like that farming, it was a lot of urban people, right? So like they aren't trained for all that. These women were, more than any we've discussed so far, were definitely more equipped to handle their husband dying out there somewhere. And it's like, okay, well, fuck. We don't need this to be a legal thing every time. It is just easier to let her keep doing it. Like, especially if she's got kids, like sons and shit. Like, just let her keep doing it. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. It ends up well. So, crucially, mundium was framed as a duty of protection, not a grant of ownership, which distinguishes it sharply from Roman patria potestas, which gave a father genuine life and death power over his entire household.
Yeah, I mean, it is more nuanced, right, in that sense, right? Like on paper, it seems like, well, what's the difference, right? Literally, if your dad told you you need to divorce your husband because I have a better one lined up for you now, you did it.
Correct.
Honestly, him asking you was a formality. That's it. Like, versus like what we already discussed, it's like, oh, he beat the shit out of my daughter. Like, that's the other thing. Like, unless your dad actually wants you back, right? Like, if your husband beat the shit out of you, that's his legal right.
Mm-hmm.
Not as much. It's not that it's illegal, but if your family gives a shit about you, you could absolutely get the out of that.
Yes.
You know, there's more to it. You know, and so literally, you're literally property under that.
Yes.
You don't. We talked about this with Mark Antony and all the Antonias. Like, you don't even get your own name.
Yep.
Like, you get
It
your dad's
sucks.
last name, and you're Antonia 1, 2, 3. That's why we have so many Julias. That's the Julia and Claudians. You know,
It's so bad.
like, you don't even get your own name. So,
No.
just who you belong to.
Germanic guardianship was more like a formal representation agreement. If the guardian abused a woman, squandered her property, or failed in his duty, her birth family had the legal right to intervene, demand restitution, and dissolve the marriage. Her kin were a check on her husband's power, and it was one with real teeth. The Vergild system reveals the law's underlying logic with uncomfortable clarity. A free woman's Vergild was generally double that of a free man. If she was pregnant, the fine for killing her was tripled. The reasoning was unapologetic. A woman's capacity to bear children was the tribe's future, and the law priced it accordingly. The same logic meant that once she was past childbearing age, her Vergild often dropped back to equal or below that of a free man. The law valued her reproductive capacity, not her personhood as such. Stark, but worth understanding on its own terms. Property law is where Germanic women had their most striking advantages. The Morgengabe, the morning gift, was the cornerstone of a woman's economic independence. A substantial gift of land, livestock, or gold given by the husband the morning after the wedding, belonging solely to her. He could not sell it or give it away without her consent. It was her private reserve, her social insurance, her emergency fund, her foundation. If widowed, she lived off it. If divorced without cause, she took it with her. If her husband's mismanagement brought the household to ruin, her Morgengabe was legally protected from his creditors. She was the family's financial backstop, the collateral that survived even catastrophic male failure.
Which is honestly, again, astounding. We don't see this again until the 20th century, right? Like, we see this in the Regency all the time, which is the late 1700s, early 1800s, even, right? Like, where the Victorians, but a husband gambles all their fortune away, including the crap that her family had given to him during that, and then she has to go ask her parents for more money or something, or say he dies and she gets slammed with all of his bad decisions, like she had, which is crazy, right? Because on the one hand, legally, she's just some poor child who can't think for herself, but then the moment, hence why she has this husband, but the moment her husband dies, like, oh well, you should have known better, even though none of these decisions were made, in theory, with your legal approval, or I mean, she could have been on board with all of it, but legally, even if she wasn't, doesn't matter, Yeah, we're gonna hold you legally responsible.
Yep.
Crazy. But this is in thousands years ago, there's essentially a safeguard. It's not a perfect system. I'm just saying, at least they had one.
At least they did, and this this reminds me of actually some things that I have seen in Islamic law, which very much
That's
it mimics this
yeah,
quite
and you
well.
do. To be fair, this I'm talking with a Western lens. You, of course, absolutely see this in non-Western cultures.
Hmm.
Islam's a great example of that. You know, India there's cultures within India that absolutely did this, right? Well, honestly,
Yes.
there's a lot of parallels there. Um, like it's not like we saw this with ancient Egypt too. Yet it doesn't take long to really scratch that surface. And even Sparta, right? Like you saw some of that. That was flawed, but you saw it. The
Yeah.
point was just that like as far as like when like we think especially like the West, right, and European history. No, no, not common at all. These poor women, and like really, even like in America, places like that wasn't codified in anything until like the 20th century, and
Hmm.
pretty far in, right? Like divorce as a concept wasn't even really codified until like what the 50s, 60s,
Yep.
like right.
And I
So
would like everyone to keep in the back of their mind, poisonings and sudden death of husbands happened a lot more frequently before that became codified,
especially in Rome.
especially in
Oh,
Rome.
they went to Starvation Island.
They
And
did.
then, to be fair, women went to Starvation Island. So, like, eh.
Eh, but
Anyway,
yep.
speaking of divorce,
Divorce was available to women, which surprises most people. A man could divorce on grounds of adultery, infertility, or witchcraft. But women also had recognized grounds. Icelandic law allowed a woman to divorce her husband for failing to provide for her economically, for physical abuse in front of witnesses, or for effeminacy, which could include something as specific as wearing a shirt with too low a neckline, implying a failure of masculine honor that reflected on the whole household.
so they weren't a fan of lavender marriages. Got it. I mean, that
No.
last part's a little unfortunate, but I mean, I suppose it counters the witchcraft thing for the other side, right? like,
Yeah, a little bit. A little
like
bit.
I don't know. I just think he's gay. Like, I don't know. It's a little effeminate for me. Sorry, babes.
Possible. I'm sorry. Every time that he enters me, he's going, ew, 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 ew.
Like it's been 20 years and I'm still not pregnant. Well, he won't even. Well, like maybe you're not. Maybe you're just barren. No, I am now, but it's because he never put it in me. He just like it would just flop around like a dead fish. Anyway,
The underlying principle was serious. A woman had the right to a husband who fulfilled his social function. And if she left for a valid cause, she kept everything.
good for her.
Adultery was the one area of near total asymmetry. For a woman, it was the gravest possible offense, often punishable by death, because Germanic inheritance law depended entirely on knowing who a man's children were. For a man, it was generally only an offense if it involved another man's wife, making it a violation of property rights rather than a moral transgression. The asymmetry was real, and it would be dishonest to try and minimize it. See, that's fucked
Yeah,
up.
and it is. But now I have a question. Like a thought that
Yep.
runs through my head, right? Like, so say a woman was unmarried, right? Whether she be a widow or she's just, I don't know, 20 something and not married to anybody yet. Like, how does that work? Like, is that as big of a deal? It's not adultery on anyone's part, right? But, like, I mean, like, the downside would be, I guess there's no guarantee for that. We don't have, like, bastards. We don't have, like, illegitimate children in that sense yet, right?
No.
So,
And
it's
I'm
just
sure there were
interesting.
probably marriages that happened because, oh,
Right, shotgun
there's a
marriages for
belly
sure.
growing.
But like, I just do find that interesting, like, because like, there's plenty of stories of a men going out there and sticking their dick in it. But like, and I mean, that's unfortunate that the women can't really do the same thing, going around pegging people. I guess I don't know.
Damn.
But like,
There goes my
on
nut
the other,
plants.
on the, On the other hand, though, like if you look at it just purely from the fact, like, well, he's the one who knocked her up, and so he can marry, I guess, 3 or 4 broads. I mean, I guess as long as he's kind of like, if we're keeping it legal, not because it's the right thing, or I think this is the way it should be, or that people should be forced to be married to other people, but like, if it's more under the guise of like, yes, if you knock it up, you have to marry it. That's a him thing. And if he does that too many times, well, buddy, you got to pay for all that. So I would almost be more okay if that's what it was too. But we don't know that. We don't know that. We just know
we don't
that
have that part of the story, unfortunately.
Nope. We just know that if she fucks around, it's not good. And if he fucks around, I guess no one cares. So.
All right, so let's switch over to politics. Germanic women had no formal political rights. Let's be clear about that from the start. They couldn't vote at the Thing, the tribal assembly where free men decided on laws, disputes, and war. The vote was conducted by banging spear shafts on shields, deliberately excluding those who didn't carry weapons of war. But formal authority and actual power are two different things. And in the Germanic world, the gap between them was wide enough to build a career in. The mead hall was the domain of the high-ranking women, and feasts were where politics actually happened. The queen, or chieftain's wife, controlled the flow of the evening. The cup-passing ritual, described in detail in Beowulf through the character Weithio, was not a servile jester. It was a political act dressed as hospitality. Who she offered the cup to first, who waited, those were public statements about status, hierarchy, and royal favor. She was also the hall's peacekeeper in a literal sense. Germanic feasts were not genteel affairs, and armed men drinking heavily were a constant potential for violence. Beowulf even has a technical term for this role. She was a fridusib, a peace weaver. Circulating through the hall, reading the room, sitting briefly with men growing heated, offering the cup at the right moment. This was a skilled diplomatic practice, and getting it wrong meant blood feuds that lasted 3 generations. The prophetess gave women an even more direct line to power. In a culture where divine will was a genuine force in human affairs, a woman who could speak authoritatively about what the gods intended was functionally a source of policy. The most striking historical example is Velida, seeress of the Bructiri, who became a central figure in the Batavian revolt against Rome in 69 to 70 AD. She arbitrated treaties between warring tribes. Roman legions sent representatives to negotiate with her directly. Ambassadors weren't permitted to see her face to face. They communicated through an intermediary, which only enhanced her mystique. The Romans found this baffling and unsettling, which was probably the point. As tribes consolidated into kingdoms, the most common path to direct power was as regent for an underaged son. Amalasuntha ruled Ostrogothic Italy in the early 6th century. She educated her son in the Roman manner over Gothic nobility's objections, sought diplomatic alignment with Byzantium, and managed extraordinarily complex politics. The nobles eventually had her murdered, which tells you how seriously they took her. Brunhilde and Fredegund, the 2 Frankish queens whose decade-long feud consumed 6th century Frankish politics, raised armies, ordered assassinations, and demonstrated that there were essentially nothing in the playbook of medieval power politics that a sufficiently motivated Germanic woman couldn't and wouldn't do.
Those 2 girls, girl, I cannot wait to cover them at some point. I was very tempted to put them in this, but I'm not going to, because they're not really witches. Though there is Fredegund is accused of that, but it's a story for another day. These are women who really, God, should get more attention, and they don't. But I am starting to see more people tune in on that, and I love that for them. But just the idea that these 2 women, right? essentially ruled between the both of them most of Europe.
Okay.
Wild. Wild. Like, not directly, but like as regents. Like, the one, Brunhilde, was like a regent for like for her like son, her grandson, then like her great grandson, like for real. Like,
Damn.
yeah, it just, though Brunhilde does not have a happy ending, unfortunately. She
Powerful
look, these
women
two girls
rarely
for
do.
well, to be fair, it's because Fredigan's descendant decided, finally got his hands on her, right? Because those two girls were beefing, and when he finally got his hands on her, he had her. And she was an old lady by this point, like, 80s. Had her like hair and like tied to the end of a horse,
Ooh.
and like, she's like not able to move. Yep, I guess popped her head right off.
Oh!
So that's one version. The other is where she's just like, pulled apart in general. But still, either way,
Yep.
not great. Not great.
No, not great. No.
So
Yikes. Ooh.
yeah.
So one final dynamic worth pausing on. The right to rule was sometimes understood as residing in the female bloodline. In the Hamingya, the luck or guardian spirit that traveled through a family. This had a practical consequence. A man who killed a king would typically marry the widow or daughter as quickly as possible, not merely out of desire, but out of political necessity. Marrying her meant acquiring, in the eyes of the tribe, some portion of the old dynasty's legitimacy. The woman was the vessel of legitimacy, even if she had no formal authority. The man who wanted to rule needed her. That is a form of power, even when it isn't one she got to exercise on her own terms. Now let's talk about one of my favorite things. The pretty glittery, sparkly, shiny stuff. In a world without banks, without reliable coinage, and with a population that might need to move at short notice, wealth had to be portable. The solution was to wear it. Women's jewelry wasn't decorative in the way we think of jewelry. It was simultaneously a display of status, a store of value, a medium of exchange, and a portable credential that announced who you were and what your household represented. The most iconic pieces were the fibulae, ornamental brooches fastening the dress at the shoulders. At the lower end, simple iron or bone pins. At the upper end, massive gilded silver or gold pieces, carved in the Germanic animal style and inlaid with garnets or amber. These were bespoke, distinctive, and immediately legible to anyone who knew how to read them. Hanging below the brooches was the chatelaine. Chains holding keys, tweezers, small blades, and other tools alongside decorative metal elements. These keys were not incidental. In the Germanic world, a woman's keys were a legal symbol, material evidence of her administrative authority over the household storehouses and strong boxes. High-status women are consistently found buried with their keys at the waist as if still on duty in the afterlife. Amber, of course, deserves its own mention. The Baltic coastline, home to many Germanic tribes, was the world's primary amber source, and in the Mediterranean world, it was worth extraordinary prices. A woman wearing an elaborate amber necklace was displaying her family's access to high-value export, signaling her spiritual protection. Amber was believed to have prophylactic properties, and announcing her family's position in trade networks connecting the Germanic north to Rome. Bracteates, thin gold medallions reworking Roman coin imagery with Germanic iconography, were political gifts from chieftains, a visible advertisement of family connections and standing. And in genuine crisis, the jewelry could be disassembled. Spiral arm rings could be unwound and clipped to precise weights of metal for trade. It was liquid capital that happened to look beautiful.
All right. So It's time to talk about the elephant in the room, and perhaps what many of you are hoping we do talk about, right? The Shield Maiden, the Skjoldmeyr, the subject of more romantic fantasy and more academic argument than almost any other aspect of German women's history. Getting at the truth requires navigating layers of myth, modern projection, genuine historical evidence, and ongoing scholarly disagreement. So, to start with, the mythology, because it matters. In Germanic cosmological imagination, war was not exclusively male. We see that with the Valkyries, the choosers of the slain. They were not gentle angelic figures. In Durad Ariolg, they are depicted weaving a tapestry on a loom of human entrails and spear shafts, using the severed heads as weights.
Ugh.
That's intense. I kind of love that, though. Like, turn that on its head, literally. It's like, oh, is what she weaving? Oh, God! You thought that weaving was ladylike? Anyway.
It is ladylike. That is ladylike right there.
We're just doing women's work. Mind your fucking business. Unless you want to end up on this loom. And they are actively deciding who lived and died. The supreme spiritual authority over the battlefield was imagined as female. Saga figures like Lagertha and Hervor provide the literary template. Women who take up weapons in times of necessity, temporarily assume a masculine identity, fulfill their purpose, then step back. The sagas treat this as an extraordinary but not impossible, which is itself informative. For most of the 20th century, historians dismissed the Shield Maidens as just pure fiction. Then came DNA analysis. Grave BJ 581 at Birka, Sweden, known since its excavation in the 1870s and long considered the site's most definitive warrior burial, contained a complete professional warrior's kit, including a sword, axe, spear, armor-piercing, arrows, shield, 2 whole horses, and gaming set associated with military command. And of course, it was assumed without question to be a male. But in 2017, DNA analysis confirmed the individual was biologically a lady.
Yes, girl.
There's a point, and I see this sometimes too. It's like, well, she was just buried with a sword, like it's like a honor. It's like a symbolic thing. Really?
I don't think
this
so.
Seems excessive. I feel like this proves the point that would be excessive. Really, a sword, axe, like literally all of the things. Really?
Mm-hmm.
So, academic debate continues, and some accept the straightforward interpretation, a woman who held the rank and status of a high-level military commander. Others note her skeletal structure showed none of the trauma typical of years of frontline combat and suggest she may have been a strategic leader rather than a frontline fighter, which, I mean, that could be true. Two things can be true.
Yes, they can.
Right? But especially if she was like the queen. Like, she's not going to be like in the front. That's stupid. The king wasn't either. Still, others propose that the weapons might be symbolic, because here we go. Inherited authority rather than personal use, which I go, that seems like overkill if it was symbolic. Right? But especially where we've been discussing how precious everything is, resources are, that seems like a lot. Right?
Correct.
Especially if it didn't belong to her. But what's not disputed is that someone decides she deserved the burial with full kit of the highest ranked warrior. Whatever she was in life, she was honored in death as one. This is itself significant. The more common reality was probably less dramatic but interesting in its own way. Ordinary Germanic women had a recognized tactical role that wasn't about individual combat, but was genuinely strategic. We talked about Tacitus earlier and how he described women just standing just behind the shield wall when a battle was going badly. When German men began to break, women would surge forward. apparently bearing their breasts, which I don't know how much of that I believe, because they do this with the Celts and stuff too. So
Yeah.
yeah. And when German men began to break, the women would surge forward, bearing their breasts, shrieking that they would rather die than be captured by Rome, that their children would rather have dead mothers than enslaved ones. I mean, and again, we talked about that earlier. Maybe true, maybe not. According to Tacitus, though, it worked. The men who might have broken instead held. And women were psychological anchors, embodying everything the men were supposed to be protecting, making retreat unthinkable by making it visible, right? And so I'm going to get into it. After the battle, they were, of course, the surgeons, right? Moving through the fallen, applying poultices, drawing out weapons, doing whatever passed for emergency medicine in the field at that time. So Tacitus notes that a man's glory was not complete until a woman in his life had examined his wounds and acknowledged them. The wife or mother who tended a warrior's injuries was literally ratifying his courage. Her witness is what made his bravery real. So I would like to say this. Maybe they weren't just, running down the hill with their tits out, okay? Maybe it's a cool thought, but, maybe not. But what I do believe is that we know that the women are there, for sure, right? It's not that they don't need to have their tits out for it to work. The fact that they can see them, their wives and kids, and know if they fail, they're all fucked. Right over there, right in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
That can be incentive enough, I think.
I think it can be.
I mean, maybe their boobs are out. Maybe they are. I don't know. But it seems a little cold up there for that. But, maybe. But
I mean, they also might be used to the cold. So.
Right. I mean, maybe that's it. They're so cold that those titties can be used as weapons because their nipples are sharp as knives.
I mean, potentially.
Cut right through that Roman armor.
Bewitch them because the headlights are on. What is this light coming at us?
She's just like swirling them like the pasties on. She's like, look at these. All right, guys, go. Kill them while they're distracted. You do see this in Celtic myth, where it is Celtic myth and Irish myths, where, Colin, it's like one of his things, like, he's like trying, like, he's going on his warp spasm, he's killing everybody, right? And, like, he's like a kid, I guess, but, like, the king's like, quick, send the women out, and the women come out with their tits out, and he's just so embarrassed by it that he shuts down. So it's like, it's there. I'm like, I don't know. These are not Celts, they're Germans. And even then, I'm like, I don't know. It's definitely not something Roman women would do. So anytime I hear of someone the Romans are fighting doing something that they would never do, I always raise an eyebrow.
Yeah, raise an eyebrow, but at the same time, like, because Rome is so uptight and so heavily moralistic, and I'm not saying like they actually have morals or anything. They believe they have their
morals are based
moral
off the
code.
Culture.
Correct. Yeah. The idea of seeing a woman running at them with tits out might actually like startle the shit out of them, though.
Well, just like the Viking, the Germanic tribes and Celtic men, they just fought with their shirts off. I mean, maybe, but not always. The point is more that I'm making is that the fact that they're even there in the first place, already different than Romans, right? Their families are there. It's not as mechanical, industrialized like the Roman armies are. So the women don't need to be tits out. They don't need to be that. They can just, the fact that they're even there, honestly badass, right? And also maybe even being a backup reserve.
Exactly.
Like, if it looks like shit is hitting the fan, maybe the wives do come up, grab a spear, and try to hold that wall. Because it's survival. That's badass enough. I feel like if anything, like having their tits out is not as practical. But, I don't know their culture. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. Point is, on the legal side, a woman who was her family's sole surviving member could assume the status of Balgriger in some Norse and Germanic codes. inheriting not just property, but obligations, including the duty of blood vengeance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So say your husband, we're going to see this with Olga of Kiev. So excited for that. But anyway, so there are certain circumstances, right? Even if your husband's a dick, um, you know, maybe don't tear him in half with two trees. So you may have a situation where you find yourself in that, right? That's a circumstance where she could also carry weapons and act legally as a man until she's, I would say until she's either married or until like the duty's done. Like maybe it's like, all right, get the duty done, and then either your son's old enough if you have one, or you get married because you're still within like childbearing years, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the point was that she essentially is acting as like the emergency power and able to carry on that torch if need be. And many historical accounts of armed women probably originate from this category rather than from any general cultural norm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we could look, that's very, very grand. Like you could look at a smaller level, right? Maybe your dad, who's not necessarily a noble or anything, or like your brother, right, was the last surviving member of your family. He went out to fight a war and then he was captured, and instead of being held hostage or returned, they killed him. Well, you're the daughter, but you've decided to take it upon yourself to fight for your father or dad or whatever's honor at that point. That would be considered acceptable. And with this constant raiding and warfare and clan mentality, I'm sure it happened a lot, right? And we're not even touching on the circumstances where maybe a girl was allowed to just do it without reason. I'm sure that did come up from time to time, right? So especially if she was like a kind of a big bitch, you know, a giant woman. So, you know, with that being said, even outside of these special cases, free Germanic women were rarely defenseless. The sax, a single-edged knife worn at the belt, what the Saxons are named after, used daily for food preparation and textile work, was entirely capable of killing in close quarters. I mean, it's practically a short sword, you know? Like a knife, it's like, you call that a knife? This is a knife, and it's like crazy big. So, and because Germanic warfare was frequently based on raiding, the home front was often an actual front line. Makes sense. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites include arrowheads in the ruins of buildings, knife-scarred skeletal remains, suggesting that when raiders came and found the men gone, they found the women fighting.
I love that so much.
Yeah, I mean, and it makes sense, right? Like we've done a lot of talking about like, yeah, like their domestic sphere and stuff like that. But the men are away, right? What are those men away doing? Right. Raiding. And for a long time, it was raiding each other. It wasn't until like the quote unquote Viking age when they start going after England and like France and stuff. Like, and like if we're going even further in the past, right? Like, of course, clans fought each other and raided each other. Of course they did.
Proximity.
Right? Just because your neighbor honors this stuff doesn't mean you like. Doesn't mean like the neighboring tribe does, right? You might. It makes sense. Like the law, they don't give a fuck about your law. It's not their law, you know? So, yeah, if your husband's away, you might have to defend your home. You know? And, like, you can't just, it's not like they keep a reserve of dudes.
No.
So,
they can't.
Right. And you,
because everyone has to do something.
So this is not to take away from the idea that shield maidens existed. It quite contrary. I believe they, of course, did in a very defensive way, right? It, you know, like of course they could defend themselves and their homes. Of course they could, right? In that kind of environment, it would be stupid if they couldn't.
Agreed.
I don't think they would have survived as a culture if that had been the case. After we get literacy involved, and there's like this, like especially like with the Franks, who are really trying to be Roman, yes, then women kind of get put in these like boxes, you know. But and then of course we go into the medieval and modern and all that. But
Yeah,
yeah, especially in these ancient times, that would make no sense if they couldn't. Like, it doesn't even make any sense. So,
agreed. Very much agreed. So now we shift to the dead. The Germanic belief in an afterlife that mirrored earthly existence is, for archaeologists, an extraordinary gift. These people buried their dead with the things that defined them in life. Female graves are consequently one of our richest sources of understanding of what Germanic women actually were. Open a high status woman's grave, and you typically find a functional survival kit. The spindle whorl is almost always there, present even in queens' graves, signaling that industry and productive skills were core virtues of womanhood, not activities status freed you from. The utility knife sits at the belt, not a sword, but a blade, a marker of free status in a culture that distinguished carefully between the free and the unfree. The keys, where present, are perhaps the most eloquent objects in any female burial. Material evidence of administrative authority, of the legal right to control the household's resources. When a woman was buried with her keys, her community was saying, this was the person who decided what got locked away and what got distributed. Seeress graves are their own extraordinary category. Instead of spinning tools, the iron staff. The vol is the defining object, a heavy, ornate rod symbolizing the authority to manipulate fate. These graves consistently contain goods from astonishing distances: cowrie shells from the Indian Ocean, Roman glass, silks from Asia. The vulva's spiritual authority operated at a scale that transcended local politics, and the exotic goods in her grave are physical testimony to that reach. Alongside them, typically the tools of divination, small pouches with owl pellets, animal teeth, carbonized seeds, the working materials of a woman whose profession was seeing things others couldn't. Wagon burials form another distinct category. High-status women interred inside their wagons, surrounded by bronze cauldrons and drinking horns. The material culture of feasting and abundance. These emphasize the woman's role as the leefdeeg, the loaf giver, the provider, buried inside the mechanism of mobility and surrounded by the tools of feeding people. These women seem to have been understood as continuing their role into the afterlife, presiding over a table that never ran out. Weapon burials for women are rare, and when they occur, as at Burqa, the debate is genuine. Was this a woman who fought, a strategic commander, a family's legal male heir, or someone whose weapons were symbolic of inherited authority? The honest answer is that the culture was apparently flexible enough to accommodate all of these, and different cases may represent genuine different stations. That flexibility is itself the most telling fact of all.
So today, we have learned, perhaps not surprisingly, that the ancient Germanic woman doesn't fit neatly into any category that modern thinking has prepared for her. She was legally dependent, but also economically protected. She had no vote in the assembly, but shaped political outcomes through ritual, hospitality, and strategic marriage. She was culturally identified with peace and domesticity, and she stood behind the shield wall when the line was about to break. She managed the household. That was the basic unit of the entire economy. She brewed ale that kept people alive. She wove the sails that made the ships move. She kept the fire burning and kept the family from dying. She remembered genealogies and lore and names of the ancestors. She tended wounded and ratified the brave. She poured libations for the land spirits and presided over the moments when new life entered the world. She kept the keys, the one found at her waist in grave after grave, the ones that opened the storehouses, the strong boxes, and grain bins. They were her legal and economic authority made tangible. In a world where the household was fundamental engine of survival, the person who decided what got locked away and what got distributed, what got consumed now and what was held back for March later. held power that no formal exclusion from the thing could entirely cancel out. She held keys to everything. In a world where everything depended on the household, that was not a small thing.
If you like what you heard today, please give us a positive review on whatever platform you listen to this podcast on. It goes a long way for us to appease the algorithm gods and get this suggested to others just like you. The more we can connect to our fellow history nerds, the more we can build up a community and keep the show going.
Also, we have a Patreon where you can hang out with us and get exclusive contents like videos where we might try to make some ancient recipes, talk about topics that couldn't fit into the main arcs of the podcast, and just generally being batshit and dumpster fires, all for the price of a latte per month. Research materials and books cost lots of money, and it takes a lot of time to create the show, so anything you can provide would be a huge help.
We can't wait to see you again next week, and as always, thanks for listening.
Bye for now.
Bye, guys.